last week, Forbes came out with its annual list of the world's richest folks. And once again, the guy at the top of the list was Carlos Slim. He's worth $73 billion. Now, who the heck is Carlos Slim? And how did he get all that money? He got it by controlling the majority of Mexico's telecom industry. Richest guy in the world's a Mexican. Slim purchased Telmex, which was the state national telecommunications company, in 1990 when it was privatized. And ever since then, he's grown this Mexican telecom monopoly quite well, thank you very much. Largely in part to his abundant political connections and the ability to buy politicians. He's basically been able to have a stranglehold on the telco industry, particularly cell phones, but also hardwired phones, without asking any questions nationwide in Mexico. But it looks like maybe, this was a piece I saw in the Financial Times yesterday that got me thinking about this. In fact, it basically asserted this, that maybe Carlos Slim's vast wealth could soon be taking a hit. Yesterday, the Mexican government, this is the pre-party, which used to be the ruling party, and then it wasn't, and now it is again. The Mexican government announced a sweeping new proposal to crack down on telecom monopolies and tycoons like Carlos Slim. Believe it or not. This is like the U.S. government going after Bill Gates, right? This bill, which is part of Mexico's most ambitious economic reform package in a generation, their phrase, not mine, would establish a telecom industry regulator who would have a wide array of powers to curb companies' control of markets. Now, why would you do that? Because it opens room for competition. Thanks to Slim's Mexican telecom monopoly, competition in that marketplace has been basically killed, which drives up the prices of phone and internet services for Mexican consumers. America Movil is Slim's Pan-American telecom provider, controls 70% of the cell phone market in Mexico. Sort of like, AT&T, Verizon. Anyhow, under the new proposal, the regulating body of the telecom industry could classify any company with more than half of the market share as a so-called dominant company. That's their phrase, dominant. And dominant companies would then be subjected to a variety of sanctions, fines, pricing regulations, and they could even be forced to sell off their assets. In other words, they're breaking them up, just like we broke up AT&T. Why is it happening now? Why have the lawmakers in Mexico finally decided that they're going to chip away at Carlos Slim's empire? Well, it's pretty simple. The Mexican people, and by extension the Mexican government, has realized that libertarian capitalism, left unchecked, always leads to monopoly. Carlos Slim's telecom takeover was left unchecked, and he ended up gaining a virtual monopoly on the industry at the expense of the Mexican people. Unfortunately, here in the United States, we've allowed our telecom industry to also turn into a virtual monopoly, really more of a duopoly, with AT&T and Verizon having a stranglehold on our market. And as a result of that, Americans are being squeezed dry when it comes to our cell phone plans. Looked at your phone bill recently? With AT&T, a cell phone plan with unlimited minutes and unlimited text and 5 gigs of data costs $140 a month. On Verizon, it's about $130 a month. Now, on the other side of the Atlantic, over in Europe, they figured this thing out, and they said, we're not going to have monopolies. They enforced the European version of the Sherman Antitrust Act. The EU has very, very strong antitrust policies. And as a result, there's plenty of competition in the cellular market in Europe, which means lower costs for the consumer. For example, in the UK, a plan comparable to the AT&T Verizon plans that I just laid out would cost, the AT&T Verizon plans would cost well over $100. That's a little under $70, $60 and change on Orange, which is one of Europe's larger cell phone providers. And even if you were to increase the amount of data in your plan on Orange, you'd still be paying less than AT&T or Verizon. And on continental Europe, the cost could be as low as $20 a month. As of 2009, American cell phone customers paid on average $635 a year for service. It's a year per year, $635. Compare that with the Netherlands and Finland, where it's $131 a year. It's like $15 a month. $137 a year in Sweden. In France, the average citizen pays $33 a month for what the New York Times described as, and I quote, internet service twice as fast as what you get on Verizon or Comcast, bundled with digital high-definition television, unlimited long distance, and international calling to 70 countries, and wireless internet connectivity for your laptop or smartphone throughout most of the country. $33 a month. So Europe caught on to monopolies in the telecom industry, and they did something about it. And now Mexico is trying to do the same thing to help ensure competition in the marketplace and lower prices for consumers, which to me sounds like a reasonable thing, right? I mean, isn't it about time we did this? I am so sick and tired of spending hundreds of dollars on cell phone service. I mean, between Louise and me, and we've just got a simple plan, with 5 gigs of data, enough so that you can use your phone as a hotspot when you're traveling. And it's a couple $100 a month. That's insane. We would be paying, for the two of us, we'd be paying $70 a month if we lived in France. Or less if we lived in Germany. I mean, when dozens of nations throughout the developed world are paying less. Richard Nixon used the Sherman Antitrust Act to break up AT&T's Bell system into 7 different companies known as the Baby Bells. It ended up really happening under the Carter and early Reagan administration. But this left the market open for new players to jump in. You had MCI and Sprint, these companies that just came out of nowhere. And when AT&T was broken up, in the end, it was good for everybody because, if you own stock in AT&T and now you own stock in these 7 companies, these 6 Baby Bells and Bell Labs, which was renamed as, whatever it was renamed as, their value tripled. You made a lot of money on that stock. But then came Reagan. And he functionally stopped enforcing the Sherman Act. The monopolies and the oligopolies, the duopolies, the triopolies began to return with the M&A mania in the 1980s. Remember that? And the Baby Bells that had been successfully broken up, they started getting back together again. If we were to give the telecom and internet oligopolies the same treatment today that Richard Nixon gave AT&T in the 1970s, then maybe Americans could enjoy the same super fast internet speeds and super cheap rates that most of the rest of the developed world enjoys and that Mexico is trying to grab hold of right now. It's time to break up the telecom industry once again, and this time make sure it sticks. It is insane that you have a choice of 2 cell phone providers or 3 cell phone providers. And in a lot of areas, the coverage is so bad, it's basically 1 cell phone provider when you can go to even the rural parts of Europe and pick from 30 or 40. Why is that? Because even though one company may own the towers, multiple companies can carry their signals on those towers. The technology is straightforward. They pay rent. It's not like they're getting a free ride. But guess what? You have competition. And in capitalism, in libertarian capitalism, the one thing that companies will always try to do is destroy competition. And they've done it here in the United States. And they did it in Mexico.